Women farm workers and dwellers are calling on Remgro Limited's Johan Rupert to endorse the introduction of a wealth tax on the richest 1% of South Africa's population. Let's speak now to Colette Solomon, who is the director of the Women on Farms project. Colette, thank you so much for making time. You've handed out a memorandum to Remgro Limited. What are you demanding, and why did you choose to hand it over at Johan Rupert's doorstep?
Well, just a bit of background to that, Clemens. Women farm workers are calling for the introduction of a wealth tax, and that tax will be targeted at the top or the richest 1% of South Africans. And Johan Rupert, as the second wealthiest man in South Africa, falls into that top 1%. So we were in Stellenbosch on Wednesday last week as part of our Heritage Day celebrations, but also to launch our feminist reparation campaign. And we therefore went to Remgro's office to deliver the memorandum, asking Johan to endorse the memorandum as one of the wealthiest people in South Africa, that he endorses and supports the moral argument for the introduction of a wealth tax.
So why did you decide to hand over the memorandum and put it at Johan Rupert's doorstep? What was the decision around that, as opposed to, say, the ANC, the governing party?
Sure. So, you know, when you fight battles, you fight on many different fronts. So, of course, we will also be engaging with government, with SARS, with the Treasury, Finance, and so on. But as a privileged South African who has benefited from years of intergenerational wealth and privilege, and as I say, who is part of this top 1%, we thought that it was only right to also involve Johan, as well as all the other people in the top 1%. And there are only 356,000 people in South Africa, Clemens. 356,000 people make up this 1%, and they own more than 55% of South Africa's wealth.
Yeah, and that's why it's not a surprise that we're the most unequal society in the world. How do you see this wealth tax working and assisting in restoring the dignity of farm workers?
Yes, and the point you make about inequality is exactly part of the objective of a wealth tax. So on the one hand, yes, it will generate revenue, additional government revenue, but more systemically, structurally, it will also address the inequalities that we have in South Africa, with South Africa being the most unequal country here in the world. And it will also be a means, by generating this government revenue, it will be a means of financing social sectors, economic sectors, and a way of reparation, a way of redress for the intergenerational poverty that farm workers and their families still experience, despite the fact that they have invested hundreds of years of sweat and blood and energy and skills and capacity into building the wealth of the agricultural sector in South Africa.
Yeah. Have efforts that have been made in the past by government been helpful, Colette? I'm just thinking about the minimum wage. If I'm not mistaken, that's just below 4,000 Rand for farm workers. What difference has that made? You have worked closely with farm workers. Are they seeing a difference?
Sure. So I think, first of all, we must welcome all the post-1994 progressive legislation that has been introduced by our government, labor legislation, which was aimed at protecting the rights of farm workers and farm dwellers, and the labor legislation and tenure rights legislation are part of this progressive legislation. And the minimum wage initially for farm workers, the sectoral determination for farm workers, and the national minimum wage for all workers, these are initiatives that are greatly welcomed by farm workers. There's no doubt about it. However, on the one hand, having spoken about Johan Rupert, who is worth billions of rands, at the same time, the workers on Johan Rupert's farm earn 3,900 Rand per month. So, I mean, that is just such a gross inequality that is manifested on commercial farms in South Africa. And so while we welcome the minimum wage, and of course has made a difference to many farm workers, and it's also something legal that they can actually go to a farmer and say, the law says you must pay me 3,900 rand. So all of these things are very positive and greatly welcomed. However, it's not a living wage. It's very far from being a living wage. Farm workers routinely tell us that by the time it gets to the second or third week of the month, their households run out of food. And I think that's one of the most damning indictments in South Africa, that the farm workers who produce our food, who produce our wealth, don't have enough money and food to feed their own families.
Yeah. Colette, thank you so much for speaking to us. Colette Solomon, the director of the Women on Farms project.